It's obvious that he is very tight with the Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgans on Wall Street, and he is extremely compliant and pliant to the wishes of the large banks, going back to what we saw with Robert Rubin under the Clinton administration, changing laws in favor of the banks. And he's not doing anything to stop the banks. He's helping the banks continue to do what they were doing under Bush. So in fact, he's just a continuation of Bush on the subject of markets and finance, which is the most important part of his policy right now.
People who voted for Obama wanted real change, and they're getting platitudes, they're getting a lot of nice talk, but nothing in the way of concrete change is taking place. In this town, business as usual.
There's one puppet master that controls the left, and there's the same puppet master controls the right. They control the Republican Party, and they control the Democratic Party.
This is not a party issue. This is not a left-right issue. The question is, who should government serve? And it should serve the people.
In fact, government is just a tool of the dominant minority that uses economics and government law to enforce upon the public various mandates.
The right-left paradigm in the U.S. and in U.S. politics is taken directly from the commercial world and the corporate world. In the business world, you have Coke, Pepsi, you have McDonald's, Burger King, you've got AT&T and Verizon, you've got duopolies. And a duopoly gives the illusion of there being some competition and some choice. And it looks a little bit better than a monopoly. So, for example, in communist Russia, if they had communist Russia red and communist Russia chartreuse, there would have been the illusion of choice and something akin to democracy in Russia. But they simply said, forget it, we're just going to go with red. In the US, they have this left-right paradigm, which unfortunately, it doesn't take them out of the hard, cold fact that there is no choice. There's no social justice. There's only one choice, which is to supply more rent to the rent seekers who have now taken the whole system hostage.
We've seen the limitations on government whittled away. We have seen this erosion to the point where today it seems like nobody does care. And right now in Washington, D.C., we have seen a fall of the republic.
If the United States doesn't have its Bill of Rights and Constitution, it doesn't exist anymore. It's just more real estate, more dirt. And that's what these global corporatists want. They want to completely dismantle the Bill of Rights and Constitution, and they're doing that right now. This is the fall of the republic. Our nation is dying. We, the people that live in this fine country, need to stand up, get involved, and take the system back. It's the Bill of Rights and Constitution that we owe allegiance to, not to a political party, and not to politicians that wrap themselves in the red, white, and blue, while at the same time they destroy everything that that sacred flag stands for.
So in the old days, you used to have this globe that with 180 some odd countries, and a few of those countries had a lot of power, like the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States at various times. But today, you might better look at that globe and say that it's surrounded by huge clouds swirling around the planet. They know no national boundaries. They don't follow any specific sets of laws, and these are the big corporations. They basically control politicians around the world because they have all the money, and politicians always need money to get elected or to run their governments if they're not democratically elected politicians. They control the mainstream press, either through outright ownership or advertising budgets. They have massive amounts of lobbyists in Washington that have tremendous influence on our president and Congress. And they really are calling the shots. They form partnerships with the Chinese and the Taiwanese and the Tibetans, or with the Israelis and Arab nations, with Brazilians and Indians, with whatever country and whatever group of people has resources that they covet. And so for the first time in history, we really have this new form of an empire.
Barack Obama is a puppet of the New World Order to bring in a World Bank, to destroy the economy of this country, and to bring in global governance. And no matter how likable the fellow is, we as citizens of this country need to stand up and say no.
We have to stand up to preserve a republic here and a rule of law, which is under dire threat.
We don't want to live under a world government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations.
I don't want to believe it, and that's probably what holds me back on it, but I'm certainly seeing enough indication that it could be true. Absolutely, because they're always talking about Mexico and the United States and Canada ending up like Europe. And there's things done politically that seem to take us in that direction. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us as American citizens to pay attention.
This move to world government is not about roses and happiness and peace and a better life. It's about enslavement.
They said in their own writings, from the earliest times to the present, the world they're bringing in is to be a world where everyone who is born, or would be allowed to be born, would be born to serve the state. That would be their sole function. That's if they had a job for you to fulfill or a need for you. It's never been written about in any book that I've found as to who gave these guys the authority or permission to be the international bankers for the world. Why would you even need international bankers? Why would any government agree to use them? Why would you need to use them? Why can't any country create its own money? It tells you there was already an existing superstructure, already in existence, maybe 200-300 years ago, to give these guys permission to somehow be the overlords of all money for all countries.
Don't make us use honest accounting. Allow us to lie. We've just, under congressional pressure, changed the accounting rules for the express purpose of making sure that the big banks don't have to report honest losses.
The only way they can pass this bill is by creating and sustaining a panic atmosphere. That atmosphere is not justified. Many of us were told in private conversations that if we voted against this bill on Monday, that the sky would fall, the market would drop 2,000 or 3,000 points the first day, another couple thousand the second day, and a few members were even told that there would be martial law in America if we voted no. That's what I call fear-mongering.
We have, people in the government threatening martial law or things to get their way in the executive branch against Congress. If you put all these signs together, it doesn't look good at all. That, to the extent we are a democracy, we're sort of a hairbreadth away from a police state.
Do you think it would cause problems for the Fed or for the economy if that legislation was to pass?
My concern about the legislation is that if the GAO is auditing not only the operational aspects of our programs and the details of the programs, but is making judgments about our policy decisions, that would effectively be a takeover of monetary policy by the Congress.
Is that your position, that this bill, if it were to be passed, would interfere directly with interest rates, setting interest rates?
If we were to raise interest rates at a meeting and someone in the Congress didn't like that and said, I want the GAO to audit that decision, wouldn't that be viewed as an interference?
I wouldn't think so. This is just reviewing it, and you can do what you want.
The Federal Reserve has never been subjected to an outside audit. And if you audit them, it's very likely that Greenspan, Bernanke, and Volcker might all go to jail.
It was announced earlier today, that there will be a hearing on H.R. 1207, the bill to audit the Federal Reserve Bank. This will be the first independent audit in the Federal Reserve's 96-year history, and it's long overdue. Months ago, I asked the Vice Chairman of the Federal Reserve who received the $1 trillion in funds that the Federal Reserve has handed out to domestic institutions. He said, I'm not going to tell you. And then more recently, the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, I asked him who receives the $500 billion, we're talking about $500 billion, that the Federal Reserve handed over to foreign central banks. Who did they disseminate that money to? And he said, I don't know. $500 billion, and he doesn't know. It's long overdue. We need to audit the Federal Reserve, and I'm happy to say that we're going to have a hearing on that very soon.
The only way, really, America can get out of the current mess is you've got to shut the Fed down completely, get rid of the Fed. You've got to put the money printing mechanism back under the roof of the federal government instead of outsourcing it to the Fed.
What is the proper relationship, what should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
There is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. What the relationships are don't frankly matter.
Immediately, every country goes into action at the same time. The International Monetary Fund is mentioned at the G20 meeting. They say that it must be brought to its full power, and we need a Bretton Woods Part 2 for world taxation.
They are so arrogant and they're so sure of themselves, they're saying, yes, we created the European Union, we created the Euro, and these are from the people of the Bilderberg. We are going to create a world bank. We're going to create a world government. They're saying it out loud and clearly.
Maurice Strong is the man who said that they would never allow another country to rise up as powerful as America. It will never be allowed to happen again. And he said the best thing we can do is to tear down all the factories, all the top commerce of the United States, and level it and give it back to nature. So that was the advice from this character, who has tremendous power at the United Nations and was picked up and groomed by Rockefeller himself.
Over the past decades, since the Kennedy assassination approximately, you've had an ongoing oligarchical transformation of virtually every country in the world. And in the United States, it's taken the form of an oligarchical counter-revolution against the reforms of the 1930s, with the Wall Street interest asserting itself as more and more dominant. And once bankers and oligarchs have power, the things that they do, you could call them a policy. You could call it something like a tropism. It's like the way a plant responds. Naturally, since they're oligarchs, they're going to try to downgrade the standard of living of the vast majority of the population. They're going to claim that the world is overpopulated, that industrialization, industrial pollution, and overpopulation are the main problems that face the world. And they're generally going to try to crush and mortify any kind of popular democracy or mass movements with any kind of progressive content.
Nations rise and fall. They knew how debt could never be recuperated. They knew that disease or prolonged war could wipe out the population and the future populations that pay off debt. So these guys all work together. That's why it's no surprise that today you have Lord Rothschild coming out pushing the latest scam or religion that we must all believe in, which is global warming, which his personal bank, his family's bank in Switzerland, will be in charge of. They've run the system, the whole economic system of the world for the last 250 years. So why shouldn't they also run the economic system for the next few hundred years?
Oligarchy is a frame of mind. In other words, if you're a banker, this is already a world view. It's a world outlook, and it implies the policies that have got us here, right? Malthusian policies, zero growth policies, driving down the standard of living, attempts to wipe out all kinds of mass institutions that might be a countervailing force.
This is a scientific dictatorship, which Bertrand Russell said, and the Huxleys said, both Aldous and Julian Huxley said they would bring in the scientifically controlled society. It's not just family planning, which really means abortion and so on. It's global planning, which is literally sterilization and abortion worldwide for the ideal reduced society, and not just across the board, through genetics, through the Genome Project, through the constant IQ testing.
Globalization has economically destroyed the world. You've got at least 40 to 50,000 people who die every day worldwide from starvation, malnutrition, and diseases which can be cured for pennies, such as diarrhea. And if you ask one of these Malthusian oligarchs, don't you think that something should be done to raise the standard of living in Africa or South Asia? They'll say, no, we can't do that. That would wound the planet. That would oppress Mother Earth. So that's oligarchy. Class consciousness in this sense is absolutely essential. If you think that bankers are the same as you, you're wrong. F. Scott Fitzgerald once told Hemingway, you know, the rich are different from us. And Hemingway said, yeah, they have more money. And F. Scott Fitzgerald replied, no, it's something much deeper. It's a whole different world. To be an oligarch, to be a Rockefeller or something of this sort, means that you're in a completely different world with values which are the reverse of human values. Now, if you allow the oligarchs to continue to dominate, the destruction of world civilization is a matter of a few decades at the very, very most. So, choose.
To force their agenda through, the elites are employing one of their favorite tools, artificial crisis creation, also known as the Hegelian dialectic of problem-reaction-solution.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
The Earth's ruling elite are first and foremost monopoly men. The founder of the Rockefeller clan summed it up simply when he said, competition is a sin.
Rockefeller himself said that competition was a sin. And people quipped at that, thinking it was one of his little jokes. He made many jokes about saving pennies and stuff like this. But in reality, he was telling you a truth, that competition to a man like him, who worked for a much larger organization, competition truly was a sin. And the cartels that have been formed ever since have become much bigger, more powerful cartels which can literally command governments, sometimes to go to war on their behalf, have occurred.
The economic crash of 2008 and 2009 was an engineered crisis designed to cripple sovereign nations globally to make way for a world currency and a new bank of the world.
China's holding what, 1.5 trillion worth all over the world. They're holding U.S. currencies. They want to get out of them in a way where they're not going to lose on their investments. There's going to be a world currency. There's going to be a new reserve currency. They're going to push it through the IMF. That's going to be the banksters that are going to be in charge of it. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen sooner rather than later.
There was also a question to Geithner, do you think that the US dollar ought to be replaced? And he blew it. He had a moment of candor where he said, yeah, we're considering that. So on that day, the dollar went down 1% within a couple of minutes.
Chinese government proposal about a global currency and about the IMF regulations, the new IMF idea about the general agreements to borrow and having a faster ability to disperse to emerging markets. As I understand this proposal, it's a proposal designed to increase the use of the IMF's special drawing rights. We're actually quite open to that suggestion.
Timothy Geithner's comment about global currency is not off the table because it's not off the table and it's going to come. The whole world is ready to bail out of bucks. They just want to do it in a way where they're not going to lose on their investments. That's all that's going on.
All the people around the world, the Japanese who have $1 trillion, the Chinese who have $1 trillion, the Saudis have $1 trillion, the Europeans something similar, they're all going to dump it at the same time. The rush for the exits. And that will then create hyperinflation.
Unless we become active and become influential in the power centers of society, there's nothing we can do about it. Just knowing about it is not enough. And as long as we are given at election time an option between the Republican candidate or the Democrat candidate, both of whom have been selected by members of the Council on Foreign Relations and both of whom have the same general policies, that's not going to change anything either. So the real issue is, so what? And the answer is we've got to recapture control of the power centers of society.